Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday. I am super excited about today's stream. We have another stream of Mission Briefing, and I have with me a bunch of guests. So right here we have three members from the Twitch team, as well as, and I'll go through introductions here in a second, and I guess I'll lead with as well as Ben Newman from Apollo. So we also have Theo Browne from Twitch. We have Ben Gorden from Twitch, and we have Tony Ghita. Did I get that right? Yes, from Twitch. Ghita, sorry. Yeah, I do apologize. Yeah, sorry. But yeah, so we're here today. We're going to talk about, let this blow your mind a little bit. We're on the Apollo stream on Twitch to talk about Twitch using Apollo at Twitch. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in, but it's pretty awesome. So that's really what we're going to be doing today. Thank you for joining us, everyone in the chat. So I guess without further ado, I'll go around just kind of how everyone's displayed, and I will let everyone do some introductions. So Tony, it looks like you're in the top corner next to me, so you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure thing. I'm Tony. I'm an engineer at Twitch, and I've been working on the API for about the last 4 years. Doing a lot of GraphQL stuff. Not Apollo server, but we use a custom Go implementation. But we do implement some Apollo specific features. So basically my role is to support these other guys, Theo and Ben, and all the people that are trying to build out new features for Twitch and maintain all the stuff we have. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And next up looks like we got Theo.
Howdy, I'm Theo. I'm a front-end engineer at Twitch. I've been all over the company. I worked a lot on safety, built ModView, very involved with Dashboard and Studio as well. Been a GraphQL and Apollo nut for a very long time now. Super excited to have all these guys here to chat.
Nice. Awesome. Very cool. Thank you, Theo. Next up, we've got Ben Gorden.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben. I'm an engineering manager, formerly engineer on the browser clients team at Twitch. We kind of define a bunch of the tooling and common components that a lot of the teams like Theo's work on and help build connected components across the front end.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, so let's see. I guess actually, Ben, maybe you want to give yourself, I gave a brief introduction, but I guess, you want to take it a bit further?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I'm Ben Newman. I work at Apollo. Have worked there since it was called Meteor, Meteor Development Group to be precise. And before that, I was at Facebook, where I actually got to use a little bit of GraphQL in 2013 before it was a public thing. So yeah, been around various web development capacities for a number of years now. And this is definitely the longest I've ever been at a job. I guess chalk that up to the remote-friendly workplace and the great people.
Awesome.
So yeah, I work on Apollo client stuff mostly these days.
Awesome. Very cool. So, okay. So, and I guess I'll introduce myself. Oh, wait, I did already. Yeah. Kurt. Well, most of y'all know me anyway, I would imagine. But anyway, developer advocate at Apollo. Super stoked about both Apollo and Twitch. In case you can't tell, this is where we're building community. So yeah, we love the platform. And it seems that Twitch loves Apollo, so it only made sense for all of us to come together and chat about those two things, and kind of also open up the floor. If anyone has questions and you're in the chat, definitely let us know. Hit us up. So yeah, I guess with that, what I'm going to do is kick off. I'll hand it over to Twitch, and I'm just kind of curious to hear how Apollo was introduced and how long you've been using it, and kind of just kind of get up to speed on where you're at with Apollo or GraphQL as a whole, really.
Tony, do you want to start with GraphQL as a whole, and then I'll jump in on our use of Apollo?
Yeah. GraphQL as a whole, story time.
Yes.
Let's see.
That's what I'm here for.
So back when I joined Twitch in 2016, we were doing a pretty common thing, migrating out of a big monolith service into a service-oriented architecture. And the thing that I was working on was migrating our old REST API. So when we had I think 6 different versions of a REST API, and every version had a different kind of something different about it, about the previous one, but it wasn't like they weren't often very completely different. And within each version of an API, we had different endpoints, and a user that you get from one endpoint may look completely different from a user that you get in another endpoint. So on my side, on the server side, migrating this out into a specific API gateway functionality out of this Rails monolith was a lot of repetition. And then on the client side, I think Ben could probably speak to this better than I can, but my impression was that we found it really hard to manage the state as we did a client migration of a similar type. So at the time, we went to the first GraphQL conference in 2016, fall 2016, and we really didn't know a lot about GraphQL. But as we sat and listened to the presentations, we were like, wow, that's a problem we have, or that's a problem we have, and that's a problem we have. So it started sounding really interesting. Yeah. Although we were pretty uncertain at the time. We're like, I don't know, this kind of sounds just like this new thing, like these new web technologies come and go like every other month. Yep. But we sat down and we're like, let's see if we can make the front page renderable in GraphQL. So that's kind of what we did. We came from the conference and we started writing all the queries that we needed to just refactor the front end to fetch from the page, and that's got hooked up with the front end guys. At the time, I believe they were working on a rewrite of the client from one old framework to a React-based one. So it was kind of like this serendipitous collision of projects. So us on the backend API side trying to like reduce our repetition using GraphQL to say, all right, this is what a user looks like. It doesn't matter where you get it; it's always going to have the same fields. There's not going to be versions anymore. We're just going to evolve our schema. We're going to be thoughtful about it. And then we hooked up with the client guys. I found it pretty useful. I don't know if Ben, you want to take it from here, give that perspective.
Sure. So as Tony said, we were kind of tasked with migrating. Well, we were tasked with improving latency and performance kind of across the board for the front end client. And in doing so, we kind of identified a few different ways. One of them being switching from REST to GraphQL, because we saw that when you're sitting on like the channel page as you are today, you make something like 70 REST requests to get all the data. The reason for that is there's a lot of different components, each built with the data they have in mind. So they go make a REST request and you end up like repeating a lot of the same API calls, or like this giant Venn diagram of API calls to get all about the same data. So we knew we wanted to do GraphQL pretty much early on, and Apollo was a really good first choice for kind of setting this up with the same like idea of decentralized components, querying for the data they need. We batch it all together in a request. Cool. Now you make one or two actual network requests, and the channel page has all the data it needs. Yeah. So that was huge for us, and this big rewrite. We also switched to React for Member. We switched to Webpack for bundle splitting to kind of like align on all these goals for hitting performance.
It really does sound kind of like the perfect storm. It's like looking for different options, paths to success on the back end and front end, and luckily enough stumbled across GraphQL. I had a very similar situation when I was at Major League Soccer. We were rebuilding a lot of stuff and a lot of relational data that wasn't related as far as where you got it from. And so, that was like a big push for us too. It was like, well, we have all this duplication and we're getting all these extra properties. Like, let's take a hard look at GraphQL. Yeah, so that's cool. So how long ago was this rewrite? You said it was like 2 or 3 years ago? Did I get that right?
The front-end client rewrite began early 2017.
Cool. Awesome.
And then we kind of first launched to some users with, I don't know if anyone here remembers go.twitch.tv. Very minimal client kind of built off of the new React stack, bundle splitting, and kind of like slowly migrating features as we went. And that was in, I believe, July. And then by November, we were kind of serving the majority of Twitch experiences using this new stack.
That's awesome. And so now is like all of Twitch, this new stack, it's all React and GraphQL now?
It is for front-end www. I think almost all clients are GraphQL at this point, if not all of them as well. So like TV apps, mobile apps.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a Tesla app.
There's a Tesla Twitch app?
Yes.
That is awesome. So you could just be like cruising around watching streams?
I guess so.
Yeah.
You got to park first, but yeah, you
Well,
can.
yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah, I guess you can't cruise around. I was thinking like passengers and stuff. Yeah, it might be kind of like.
Can you stream with the app though?
Now that is next level. Yeah, you're just like chilling.
I want to be able to stream Cuphead from my Tesla.
Like while you're charging, okay, I got some time to kill. I'm charging up. I might as well stream something. That's amazing. That's so cool. But yeah, I guess, that's something I didn't even take into account, right? Like I'm just very focused on the web browser, but now you've got all these other platforms. You've got Twitch Studio as well. So I would imagine that's all like powered under this new architecture.
All of those are using Electron, so we're using pretty much the exact same stack on top of even the exact same project there. So we can pull in components from either Twilight or from any of our core web projects and use them in Studio the same way we would anywhere else.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's awesome. Here for components.
You mentioned the Go backend server. Is there like an open source project behind that, or is that just a custom thing that you built?
Yeah, so we use open source one. There's a couple. The one we use is under the organization called Graph Gophers, called GraphQL Go. So that's completely open source. We haven't modified that, although there are some things that we added to it that we haven't open sourced yet, like the Apollo persistence protocol, where you can persist a query. It's not because it's top secret or anything. It's pretty easy to implement. I think it took me like a day to write based on the spec that you guys have for the Apollo server. But it just doesn't, it's kind of like this additional thing that happens outside of that GraphQL server process, the way it's been defined. It's a very minimal library, strives to only focus on the GraphQL execution portion. So in keeping with the spirit of that library, we decided not to add that in there.
Cool.
I believe that library came out of SourceGraph originally.
Yeah. So what did you start with before Go, as far as the server? Were you using Apollo server there, and then you were just like, well, Go, I imagine there's some performance things in there. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the evolution of that? And
yeah. So before Go, we were in Rails, Ruby on Rails.
Oh, that's right, Rails, yeah.
And kind of a company decision that predates me is we decided to use Go for all our services. So we were working within those confines. We already had this REST API that we'd ported out of the monolith into a Go API gateway, and it was just the REST API. It wasn't didn't talk to any databases or anything. It just talked to other services.
Got it.
So we're working within those confines, and we were really happy with Go. It's pretty performant. It's statically typed, memory managed, pretty nice to work with. Really explicit. Doesn't provide. It's kind of the opposite of Rails in that there's almost no magic.
Yeah.
It forces you to do error checks. You read bytes, you write bytes, that kind of stuff. So we already knew we had to work with Go. So what we did was look at what were the Go libraries available. We didn't know if this was something we wanted to commit to. So we weren't going to write our own library. Wanted something to prototype well. So we looked at what was idiomatic in Go that was also a GraphQL library, which was a little bit difficult to find. But we found one that it was written with Go idioms, but as a reference to the original JavaScript library.
Got it. Yeah. Taking advantage of what Go has, but then kind of sticking to that same kind of pattern, which then I guess allowed you to just use Apollo clients on the client, and then makes life a lot easier. You're not building two custom, sides of the GraphQL puzzle. Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. So we got a question.
I'm sure Ben has a lot of custom puzzles to bring up there too, but we'll get there for sure.
Yes.
I know that Ben Gordon's worked on some pretty crazy layers on top of the Apollo clients to let us do some fun stuff.
Yeah, I really do want to get there. So we had one question come up in the chat real quick, which I'd like to go ahead and pose to everyone, and then we'll take it into the client world. So I guess, yeah, it was just more about like, what were any of the challenges that you faced, I guess, moving from like REST to that? Are you using multiple GraphQL schemas? Are you doing any type of like stitching or federation, or is it just a single like monolithic GraphQL API? I think is the gist of that. Let me know if I'm wrong. Al Franklino.
Yeah, that's a great question, Al Franklino. So the big challenges, I guess, were kind of like, where do you start? I think we took a very incremental approach, because there's so many moving pieces. So like in some cases, you need to have a team that extracts a piece of the monolith into its own service. You need to kind of define what those layers are. What the boundaries are of each service,
Right.
which aren't always as clearly defined when you got this monolith thing that kind of does everything. GraphQL, I guess, was maybe less of a challenge and more of like a enabler making this movement. Like we could hide a lot of the complexity in these movements under this API layer, so that we could move the front end separately from the back end, and I think it made that process go a lot faster than it otherwise would have.
I'll call it a win as far as making it so I could transition to front end. Before we had GraphQL in the middle of our stack, I was very much full stack leaning back end because I felt like I had to own the implementation and responsibilities on that side to actually have the front end side resolve and behave as expected. One of the biggest wins with GraphQL was that I could sit in a room with backend engineers. We could make a contract through the GraphQL schema, and once that was agreed on, we could just go our own ways, and with very, very few exceptions, once we come back, things would work as expected, and that like freed me to go full-time front end, which is where I'm at now.
Yeah, that is awesome, and I think something that doesn't really get touched on enough when people talk about some of the benefits of GraphQL. Like we did everything around the graph. Like when issues were created, like for a feature was done, it's like, well, what's the query going to look like? And then QA is like, yeah, this passes when I can run this query, and like we get back successful responses, and then the client can pick it up and they're like, oh, this is the exact query I need to drop into the component, and it just like gets everyone on the same kind of the same terminology. Everyone's on the same page. It's very nice. I guess so. With that, since we're talking about now front end, let's move into that. I'm very curious to hear how you're using Apollo Client, and apparently like building on top of that. I'm very curious to hear like what you've done to kind of push Apollo and Apollo Client at Twitch.
Sure. I guess one of the first things we've done is kind of have our own, Apollo connected component that is a kind of a reusable component that everyone else uses to talk to GraphQL. So before hooks, we had our own hook called with GraphQL that basically re-exported GraphQL, but it provided us a layer to add like specific layers of defense on top of it. One of the first hurdles we had with the front end project was partial data and partial data refetching, which is now in Apollo Client proper, but we had built on top of it, I don't know, mid 2018, early 2018 or something like that. We realized pretty early on. I guess one example is if you're like, we're watching the channel page right now, this field is your user.stream. And if you go offline and reconnect, you get a new stream object. And so there's dozens of components on screen that have to go refetch that data and get the new stuff. Or if one comes on screen, because we have dynamic loading of components and bundle splitting, if one comes on screen, requests for user.stream, and it happens to be a new one, the rest of the components on screen just suddenly turn off. So we had to solve this problem pretty early on and kind of build a poor man's partial data refetching on top of the client, which is now inside the client, which is great. So we've deleted all that code and just used partial data false and partial data refetching true. So that layer provides us a lot of stability and robustness, where we can kind of make choices that affect how the hundreds of GraphQL connected components on screen can behave. Yeah. So another really interesting.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just gonna say that's like so clever. It's very, very like it's like you're setting like kind of like this global configuration essentially for these components. They can just all adhere to that. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because generally, most feature developers, we think just want to connect to GraphQL and that's it. They don't really want to worry about kind of the minutia of,
For sure.
Some of these underlying, necessarily like problems, but they expect to have some sort of defense and just build their feature without worrying too much about that. So that layer provides us that.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, and I sorry to interrupt you. And then you were saying, you were diving in, I think, to the next.
Right. So the very next big hurdle we've kind of come across is we just recently went through a lot of work to make our schema handle partial error responses well. We call it nullability here, where basically you have an error, it rolls up to the next highest nullable field, and then the response that comes across the wire still matches the schema perfectly. So in doing that, we wanted to turn this on for all of our components on screen, but we found that the error policies that come out of Apollo natively have one little gotcha that doesn't quite work for Twitch in this like world of dynamically loading components that might go fetch an error response. So we found that if you use all or ignore to receive the actual response data, that data gets written to the cache. So say we're watching user.stream, like we were on the channel page today, another component comes in, fetches it, now user.stream is null, and entirely all these connected components, connected to the cache, all just turn off because they're like, no, there's no stream. So we wrote a little bit more nuanced error policy that basically only writes the non-error path fields to the cache and then only provides the components that are connected to these queries the full response. So maybe this new component shows a null stream, but the rest of the ones aren't affected by that bad data.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's and what a tough problem to solve. That's like, yeah, that's really cool. That's pretty wild, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of a consequence of how our schema is designed. So let's say you go to a channel page, you just type in, the URL and you put whatever you want, just like run your hand across the keyboard. And what you get back from GraphQL is user null. So this is a for user. And if the user field errors, it comes back as user null with an error. And so, the page is kind of left in this state where it has to decide what to do in that case.
Yeah, and you don't.
So we have to be a little bit more nuanced in how we approach that.
For sure, yeah, because like that's like the base of everything, right? And it's like if you set that to null, the entire UI is like, well, you're not now. Basically, you're not logged in. You're not a user anymore. Yeah, I could see that being tricky. I'm curious I wonder, would anything change in that model in Apollo 3? Apollo Ben Newman.
Yeah, I will admit that the error policies are not like a focus of the kinds of changes that we were making for AC3, but I mean, we are aware, I definitely am aware that that logic hasn't changed in a while and is definitely not serving the needs of people who are trying to do the right thing, or even exotic things with errors. Another example is that because we don't actually store the errors in the cache, if you're doing server-side rendering and the server-side rendering encounters an error, and then you extract the cache and send it down to the client and restore it on the client, you're going to have to just do the requests and get the errors, from the network in the browser again, rather than being able to lean on the serialization of the cache that the server did for you. So if you're really into server-side rendering, that's just one of those gaps where it's like not a totally seamless experience. So I do think there's some low-hanging, if not like already fallen on the ground, fruit in the error policy design space where we could be doing a much better job. I'm excited now that the sort of dust has begun to settle on Apollo Client 3, that we can move forward with some things that seemed a little bit too big to bite off and chew. Now that that's out of the way. So unfortunately, the answer is that problem is not like magically solved in AC.
Yeah.
But
For what it's worth, I'm very happy with the prioritization of the cache and cache policies in the new Apollo client. That was a huge win, and we're really excited on our end. I'm sure that Twitch Ben has a lot of things to say about that too.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's just a lot more robust. We like if you're sitting on a channel page, again, you're watching, Twitch, you're just like collecting all this memory accumulation of, GraphQL calls over time and the cache growing. So it's definitely interesting to be able to set limits on that and kick out things. One thing about the error policy I wanted to say is that I'm definitely interested in upstreaming that. I know it's like a little bit of I don't really want to call it a philosophical choice, because if your schema is designed a little bit differently, you probably don't need that at all. Like the whole design trend of doing, like, let's say we fetch a user and then maybe you, it's like a polymorphic type, you might get user or user error or something like that. That also seems to be a big trend that this might not serve. So I don't fault Apollo at all in this case. I think you guys have built a pretty robust client that kind of serves both. We just need a little bit more nuanced functionality out of it.
Yeah, for sure. Real quick, LifeSkate was asking, how hard was it to actually implement this kind of custom error policy handling? Did you hit a lot of edge cases? Was it pretty straightforward?
Mixed bag. Like we use a npm package called patch package to basically apply git diff to Apollo client as it comes in.
Yep.
And so in doing so, we had to dive into Apollo code and kind of understand the flow chart of where everything goes after you make a request. So that part, requires spinning up and diving deep and kind of, figuring things out as you go. And then another member of my team built a really cool scenario engine, I guess, where we have all these like scenarios we want to make sure pass. Like, okay, you load a user and it works, and then you load a user with an error, and that just shows user error for component B, but component A is still good. And then everything fixes themselves when component C comes in and updates the cache on top of it, et cetera. And then a bunch of different permutations inside there, which really helped us kind of like have confidence that we were making the appropriate change and weren't breaking anything. So it certainly feels a little, scary to go in and be like, hey, this is what powers Twitch. Let's go in and just turn some knobs and add new knobs ourselves. And, it can be dangerous.
For sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess, well, anytime you're breaking out patch package, you're in, could be in for some surprises, right? I
don't envy that task. I mean, my hat is off, especially with the Apollo Client 2 code.
Awesome.
I actually just recently ported it to 3.0 and everything is pretty good under the hood. So
that's cool.
I definitely foresee upstreaming this, like I said, not really leaving too much of what does all this code do? Like, why are you adding all this new stuff to Apollo? This doesn't really make much sense. There's only a couple touch points. So it ends up being okay.
For your own sanity, you'll want to do that.
Yeah.
Going forward.
So I guess diving back into we mentioned. Oh, sorry. Were you saying something, Ben? Did I cut you off?
No.
Oh, okay. I guess diving back into cache, right? Caching, Apollo Client 3. We were talking about, there was a reference made to type policies. I'd be very interested to hear how you're caching data currently. Like, do you have anything built on top of Apollo Client, or are you just, using Apollo Client to cache pretty much as is?
Basically using as is, just using in-memory cache. We've certainly been interested in improving cache performance kind of always.
Sure.
Like, there's a lot of GraphQL connected components on screen, and JavaScript is single threaded, and we've got to compete with some of our video and chat processes happening. So we, want everything to be fast. So yeah, just using Apollo Cache kind of as is, and excited for 3.0's improvements.
I'll also call out that the immutable cache change was awesome for us because we already had type aliases on all cache returns to be immutable. So it was almost as simple as just flicking the switch on for us, which was a huge performance win.
That is awesome. Yeah. I'm very excited about cache policies. I think it's really going to be big game changer for folks in Apollo 3. I'm also really a big fan of the help you get with pagination now. It's something that people always tackle differently and seem to have questions about. I feel like pagination is one of the things I get asked about the most. Yeah, so let's see. Oh, might have a question there. Oh no, okay, there we go. Yeah, so I guess a little bit more like on the front end stuff. How are y'all like organizing? So there's lots of components. Like, what does the story look like for like how something goes from like a feature that needs to be built to like getting into whichever kind of app? Like, do you get what I'm getting at there? Like, what is the workflow for creating new, I guess, components, and how does GraphQL play into that? Like, are they embedded in the presentation component? Do you have separate layers? Like all that kind of fun jazz.
Finally, something I'm the most qualified person for.
Boom.
So these guys do all of the infra and build all these awesome systems for me to make like broken features with. So I'm definitely,
Yes.
yeah, this is my wheelhouse. So we have a really strong product and design culture at Twitch. We have really talented designers that come to us with usually well flushed out and thought out mocks.
Yeah.
And my process now, when I'm a tech leader, like architecture lead for a given feature or project, I'll usually start with the mocks and I'll go through with the designer as well as the engineers who will be working on it and turn the mocks into a GraphQL schema at that point, where we go through like the exact data that would be needed for any given component or piece that the user is going to see, because all of those have some level of data requirement. Some of the data will already exist in the given schema, some won't.
Yeah.
And we can, at this point, determine what changes need to be made for us to support this feature. At that point, we'll usually have a roughly agreed upon schema, and then front end and back end go their own ways. And on the front end, like the general structure is we just have, so React TypeScript primarily for the web front end. You'll just, there's a pretty simple code ownership system. We just use GitHub code owners to determine who owns what.
Yeah.
If you're starting entirely from scratch on a new feature, you'll make a new directory, make sure the code ownership is assigned properly,
Okay.
and then just build your React components there. When you want to introduce GraphQL, it's as simple as defining a GraphQL file in the same directory where you want it. And once you've imported that GraphQL into the TypeScript world in a place that's actually hit,
Right.
then the Apollo CodeGen TypeScript generator will pick it up the next time you run that command and generate a single flat schema.ts, which is our typed GraphQL schema internally. So once you access the data, you actually have type definitions to validate the data you're getting right there, generated from the server automatically. And it's the biggest lifesaver, honestly. Like the Apollo, one of my favorite things about Apollo is the TypeScript code gen easily. It's so convenient for confirming that your types are going to behave as expected.
Yeah.
And from there, we use whatever patterns that team prefers for actually fetching the data. I'm personally a hook diehard and push browser clients and poor Ben really hard to get the upgrade with Apollo hooks as soon as possible. And once we had that, I've accessed all my data through that. One of my favorite patterns I've been doing a lot more recently is defining a query as a custom hook.
Yeah.
So that you can just pull in like use get user, and that will, you could use it in 15 different places, but the first one will hit cache the result, and then the other 14 just hit the cache.
For sure.
And it's a really consistent shared data model where before people would do things as crazy as wrap a context in a GraphQL provider just to fetch one little bit of data, store it in the context, and then share that across components that way.
Yeah.
Now we just wrap the custom hook.
Yeah.
And it's so much cleaner. And
at that point, why
way more
use
performant
Apollo's
too.
cache?
Yeah. The reason that the Apollo cache wasn't used in this way from like the places I saw was just the lack of really quick way to get that data. Now that you can define a one-line solution that you just inline in your functional component to get any piece of data that's already been defined, it's so consistent, and I can't imagine doing anything else now.
I
totally agree. The ergonomics are great.
Absolutely. I find myself doing a very similar pattern where those queries and mutations get wrapped up in custom hooks, and like now I can see a world in which this is nothing more than interacting with reactive variables in 3, or maybe there's not even a need for another level of abstraction on top of that. So it's pretty interesting to see. I mean, you'll still have a place for these queries and stuff where they need to exist. But so it's interesting to think about how Apollo 3 kind of changes that. That's awesome. Yeah, so that's cool. So we've kind of gotten like a good. I'd like to talk a bit more about TypeScript, the types, and some of the kind of the DX benefits that you're seeing from that. Yeah, and I'm also curious to know, like you said, like internal schema. Is there like, do you all expose any of the schema, or is it only like, do you have any like third-party people who access your schemas, or is it really just Twitch internally?
It's basically Twitch internally as far as the TypeScript goes. So basically, the schemas we generate TypeScript interfaces for your specific queries, fragments, or mutations
Right.
you're writing. So if your component needs user, an ID, and a stream with the game, then that's the interface you get, and everything you build in that specific component that looks at that interface is just gets that data, and you can have good guarantees about the types they're in. And so, like Theo said, we generate all these kind of upfront. We make sure your PRs have generated them as well when you go to merge them. If there's a difference, you can't merge, so you got to rerun it again. We added some linting pretty recently so that components that connect to like useQuery or GraphQL Hawk are actually using the appropriate interface we generated based on the GraphQL file they're importing. We read the file at lint time and then look at what the name of the query or mutation is, and then go say, okay, is there one in the schema that matches to this? Are you importing it from our generated schema, and are you using it? Just to kind of like close the loop on that whole thing and guarantee that components aren't saying, oh yeah, I'm using A query, but really they have B query, and now we have runtime errors. So we have a fairly robust set of like TypeScript adjacent tooling to make working with TypeScript and GraphQL better.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so
I will say one quick thing. One of Ben's pieces that I really liked that he added on top of the Apollo code gen is the try to find the right word for it, but he combines all of the resulting types that come out of the code gen into a single schema file. So by default, Apollo code gen just will spit out different files or different type files per GraphQL file or query, and either condense them all into one place or leave them in the same directory where the GraphQL was. We actually combine all of that into a single schema to prevent like fragments from being duplicated all over the place, and put all the shared pieces into a single like cohesive place. That file is gigantic, but I actually have grown very much to prefer that over the like local or like the types going where they're used, so to speak. And that's another one of those types of things I would love to see upstreamed. I think it's a really strong pattern that works great for us. Yeah,
that's really cool. I mean, it makes sense.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Ben.
TypeScript code generation is another one of the big topics I'm excited to sort of return to after AC3, which is now. In fact, one of the best things that can happen when you're working on an open source project is you have a really cool idea, and then someone comes along and just submits a pull request for it with no prompting. I don't know how that happened, but it happened today. There's a pull request that's like either the most recent one on the Apollo client repo or the second one down from Dotan Simha, who is in charge of the GraphQL code gen project. And he's got a really clever idea of letting, there's the document node type that represents queries and mutations from the GraphQL NPM library, and everyone uses it. This new type that he's introducing is called typed document node, and it just has two generic type parameters for the data and the variables, and otherwise is just a document node. In fact, it is an interface that inherits from document node. And so what this means is that if you do your type code generation right, the query itself, the parsed document, what used to be a document node, has these generic types associated with it. And that means that like use query and client.query, client.watch query can just figure out what those types are from the query that you pass it, because the types just kind of come along with it. And so you literally don't have to do anything except for have a schema and write your queries the way you normally would, and run the code gen. And then when you're using your data in your components, it'll just have the TypeScript types applied to it. That whole process, I think, is going to become much less boilerplatey soon. So that's really exciting. In retrospect, it seems like an obvious trick to use TypeScript generic types to keep the data and variables types with the query, but yeah, the future's longer than the past, so we're gonna get that implemented.
No, this is awesome.
Yeah.
This would replace our linting. We have we talked maybe abstractly about this idea at exporting types of the document nodes, but didn't quite make movement on it. So it's incredible to see a PR for the same thing. We just delete our own custom code, and here we go. Someone else is doing it.
Yeah.
Nothing better than deleting
the npm
code.
package that the package that he published that exports the typed document node type is at npm version 0.0.1, and I want him to just like move the 1 over 2 places to 1.0.0 and call it done. Just because, I don't know, 0.0.1 feels like you're underselling it. So that's exciting. And CodeGen in general is an area where we're not just about the web Apollo client. We also have an iOS and an Android client. And as we sort of work towards aligning all of those projects together, some of the new ideas from AC3 will flow over to those projects, but it being Swift and Kotlin, they can't like neglect the question of CodeGen and working well with static types, right? So that's been a big part of those projects for a long time, in a way that it just hasn't been forced on us in the web. So looking forward to borrowing ideas that they've been developing in parallel.
Does working with TypeScript make that easier for you to kind of port some of that same strongly typed functionality across?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, TypeScript gives you so many escape hatches that it is much easier to just make everything work one way or another and provide like a good developer experience regardless of what's going on under the hood. So yeah, it's a situation where I've known that we could catch up, and so I put off actually doing the work, but now's the time.
Nice. Before we get too much further, we had a question in chat from Al Franklino again. Yeah, and it looked like, Theo, you wanted to answer this. Do you want to go ahead and just take this?
Yeah, absolutely. So Al asked about on the front end side, what does it look like when we like get a design, how do we define our components from those mockups and designs? Like, is that a developer level decision, or is that done as part of like the discussion and handoff process? It is primarily like a developer level decision and discussion, but depending on the team, it's very like or dependent on teams. Some teams will have a formal tech spec process where the design doc has to be like clearly detailed with every component where it belongs in a fancy spec, or it is a simple or it's like just the developer goes in and starts defining features. The one thing I will say that's super helpful is the majority of our UI and design elements are in a shared library. It's we have our own internal equivalent of something like the Material UI or Blueprint.js open source library is a shared graphical component library, and that makes it very easy to quickly get something up and running. So usually the designers that I've worked with at the very least rely heavily on that shared asset space, which is shared both between designers and the front-end library I consume. So it's often as simple as in the Figma mock I get, click the element and it will tell me which design components they were using in their mock, and I can find the equivalent React component in my library and implement on top of that. So it's a very quick iteration process. I can't remember the last time I saw a mock. It didn't have an immediate, oh, here's a quick like component structure that'll make something that looks like this. It's not a process that it's a very informal process because it's relatively quick to do, which I really like. Oh, I didn't know that we were super public about the shared component library. Yeah, 3V just shared a link in chat from Mark, who wrote that shared library. yeah, really good stuff. Definitely take a look at that if you're curious in how we do this.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely be taking a look at that. Yeah, it's funny to see how I guess like the expansion of components and like the idea of components is moving beyond front end development into design software, no code solutions. We're seeing this becoming very prevalent, and it's great because it blurs the lines, right? And it's like now it's like, I mean, the design system is basically like within Figma at this point, and you know, I mean, there's a living one as well in React, but those components are like becoming more one-to-one. This was something we did at Major League Soccer a lot as well. It's like with the designers, we got them talking in components and everyone talking in components, and it just made it a lot clearer and easier for us to throw things together like that.
I actually remember, I've been trying to find the article for a while. I wish I could find it. There was an article about like a small or medium-sized company that actually had the design team own the GraphQL schema top to bottom, because they were the ones in their designs dictating what data was going to be shown to the users. They thought it was best for them to actually own how that data is structured and modeled, and it worked really well for them. And although like our designers don't have putting that type of additional strain on our designers would not be logical for a company like Twitch in the place that we're in. But the idea of using design as the core of what our data model should look like is really exciting to me, and I've been pushing that on the projects that I have ownership in. And I totally agree that like as these things change, things like component models, GraphQL, like CSS and JS, making it super easy to create shared styles. Those are making it so design is more and more becoming the centerpiece of software development. And I really think we're entering a future where the designers are the ones who are the most valued.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree with that more. I mean, you know, things have already kind of revolved around design, just in a much less indirect way, right? Like, I mean, it all starts with what are you presenting to your users, or, you know, whoever it may be. And so, yeah, I love seeing that push as well. That's awesome. So I guess, let's see. I'm trying to just check in chat real quick, making sure I haven't missed anything. Looks like we're good there.
Well, on that point, one of my like formative experiences as a software engineer was working at a company called Quora in, I guess, 2010, 11, which had like a really strong design team. And they also had this like live updating ahead of its time reactivity system, you know, so that like the web page would just stay up to date. You wouldn't have to reload. Data would come in and you would see it live. And one of the huge values of that whole system was that individuals on the design team could start with like an idea and like design it and then just implement it and then ship it, you know, all within like a single person's skill set, right? And just like getting rid of the dependencies between designers and engineers was the superpower of that small startup, right? Like that just unblocked so many great ideas and you know, let the company iterate much more quickly with, you know, fewer people being blocked on other people with different skills and access privileges.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited just by like the developments at Figma as a whole. Like it really feels like they're pushing in this direction of empowering designers and design to own more and more of the development process and lifecycle. And that's not even accounting for Evan Yu, who I'm just super nerdy about his recent work. I don't know if you guys have seen ES Build, but as someone who's very frustrated with the speed of Webpack and the speed of the TypeScript compiler, developments like that are so exciting to me.
He used to work for us.
Yeah.
Not to claim him or anything.
Yeah.
Really glad that he was able to go on and do amazing things on his own.
That's a really good question someone just asked about if we've considered GraphQL as a public API.
Yes, I think I can answer this one. When we started off with GraphQL, we weren't really sure about it, and we weren't sure if people that would use the public API would like it.
Yeah.
So we kind of kicked the can down the road on the decision to make a public API. I think, I don't know if it's right for us right now. Like a lot of what makes GraphQL good for us is that we can think about like our features and the data that our features have, implement it once, and then use it in all our clients. I think, and we can talk to all those clients. It's kind of scary to not be able to talk to all your users, like when you have a public API. So I know, I think Mark asked that question, who has run probably some of the largest public GraphQL APIs in the world at Shopify and GitHub. So like, maybe, yeah, I think there's some considerations that you have to make when making a public GraphQL API, and you have to be a little bit more careful about what you do with them. Like we still break our API fairly often, but in ways that like obviously it doesn't break Twitch. It's a little bit harder when you make something public to have anything that you can break. So I think with a lot of our features, we're still kind of like experimenting with like what works and what doesn't work, and it's really nice for us to like maintain the ability to just kind of kill stuff off without having to drive like a big effort to do so. So I think a lot of people at this point, I think GraphQL's become a little bit better known, and maybe will start to become expected. So I don't think it's something that's ruled out for the future, but it's something that we've considered in the past and kind of punted on. I don't know if that answers your question. A little bit unsatisfactory, I know.
It answered mine. Not yet. That's basically where it stands, right? Yeah.
I also just remember there was a question earlier from Gerardo asking about the current state of GraphQL subscriptions.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I know that I've talked about this with Tony a lot, and I'm curious if there's anything he's interested in sharing.
Yeah, let's see. I think the GraphQL subscriptions are kind of weird in that with normal GraphQL, you just have the same idea of like a stateless API. Like you don't create any state. Like you know, if you need something, you throw in some cookies or session or whatever. With subscriptions, you need to know like who asked for what, and then what changed, and then get them that latest information. So you're holding the state, and people in the chat are saying GraphQL subscriptions at Twitch. This is something that like we would really benefit from. I think a lot of companies maybe don't have this use case. But what I'm getting at is that like it's kind of a big additional expense over regular GraphQL, that you have all the state that you need to keep. You have all this infrastructure that you need to keep open these persistent WebSocket connections or however you do the transport. And we have to do it at like a very high level. So we have like millions of people watching Twitch at once. So that's millions of connections open and like things to watch. So it's a pretty high scale problem. So it's definitely not trivial for us to solve, but I do think we have a good use case for it, just because we're a live streaming site. Like you want liveness in your products. Like the easier you can build these like reactive features, the better it integrates into our ecosystem. But yeah, we had to punt on it. It's something that we were like super eager about last year. Had to punt on it. I think like I don't want to make any big announcements. It's definitely something that like a bunch of staff are in here. They're asking for it. It's definitely something we want to do, but not something we've quite figured out.
I could tack on a little bit to that. So right now we use like a pub sub kind of model for kind of real time, WebSocket pushes to the clients. And one of the first things I built when we started doing the React rewrite was this kind of like layer, or this hawk that you use to take a pub sub message and then go read data from the Apollo cache, update it how you need to, go write it back to the Apollo cache, and that way you only have like one single state management solution, which is just the Apollo cache for
good old with pub sub query updater.
Yeah, verbosity is my strong suit. Yeah, so that's one way one bit of complexity we added to kind of make working with backend data easier, but there's complexity there, and it's kind of boilerplate. You end up having to do a lot of goofy operations where maybe a GraphQL subscription would be easy peasy and nice.
Yeah, I do like though how you took a separate WebSocket kind of system and tied it into the Apollo cache, so that like at least yes, you're using different transport other than subscription, but at the end of the day, all of the data is coming from one source, which, eliminates a lot of problems. And so, I mean, yeah, subscription's probably better, but like really subscriptions are WebSockets. It's just not within GraphQL. So, but yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's just code we write versus someone else. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, less code you write is better, which actually leads me to a question from Fluffy Plums, who said, I mean, I guess it's like kind of related and unrelated, but it's a hot topic right now, so we shall allow it. With the public reveal of GPT-3, what do y'all see as like the role of AI in as far as like software development? So this is just kind of interesting. I don't know. For anyone who's not familiar, basically, it's an AI that has learned from basically all of the data that is available on the internet, essentially, I think is what they use to train this thing. And apparently you can type a couple, like a descriptive sentence of what you want. This is the examples I've seen. It like generates like UI, like code for you. You could do, it's not just developer stuff. Like it's a model that's been trained. You can do pretty much anything. I've seen people do like writing examples, lyrics, like all kind of different things. But yeah, one of the things you can use it to do is produce code.
I think AI is interesting in the sense that it's another engine for making connections that you might not make yourself, in the same way that like my own experiences, maybe I remember this one like book I read about a French jazz historian or something, and then I'm making a connection using that knowledge. That's a connection that other people might not make in the same way too. I think it's definitely an interesting idea, maybe tossing like our site at it and seeing, can we develop a QA suite of automation tests that are high value by doing that sort of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good perspective that I have not seen brought up yet in relation to this, is like testing. Like, can you tell it to walk through a set of things, like sign into this app and go, do whatever.
Yeah. People get a lot of mileage out of what's called fuzz testing, right? Where you just like generate random inputs and try to, break your app if that's what you're trying to do. And, having more structure to that, making the inputs like creative, but also like somewhat plausible, could just dramatically improve the effectiveness of that kind of like that testing, fuzz testing. So I don't know. It's exciting. I feel like some of the demos are a bit cherry picked.
For sure.
You'll see like a video rather than like a live stream of someone doing GPT-3 work. But I don't know.
As a musician, I've been told that my love of music is going to be replaced with AI that loves it more for most of my life, and it hasn't happened. And music is a hell of a lot simpler than most of the code I write. So I'm going to go out and say AI will help us break our code, not make our code. And I totally agree with that, or Twitch Ben's belief that testing tools will be the first to really take advantage of AI. And I am excited for that future, but I don't necessarily see this crazy future where soon we're not going to be writing code because computers do it better. Computers don't do much better than what the humans tell them to still. And there are still so many opportunities for us to just improve our tooling that isn't like, so we don't need AI because we're not done building the dumb tools yet. AI is a great thing to introduce when you need intelligence. We still have a lot of stupid code to write and a lot of stupid tools to build. I don't think that diving into a system that theoretically will do this for us makes a lot of sense when there is so many obvious things that we could do right now to improve our workflow and experience as developers.
Take offense to the level of software you think I write. Theo.
Dumb tooling.
Yeah. Another philosophy I've been thinking a lot about, I recently did a deep dive on Rust, and I'm really fascinated with the idea of code being written in a way where it can get rusty and it can exist for long past where you wrote it for in the instances you wrote it to perform. And I think that as web developers, a lot of us have gone the opposite way, where we're almost treating code as disposable.
Yes.
And AI code is the ultimate form of disposable code. And there are these two very divergent directions. They almost feel like exact opposites to me, where there is like the GPT-3 AI path for code that is treated as a consequence of action versus Rust, where code is treated as this thing that's going to last beyond what it was written for. And I don't necessarily. I think that there's a world where these two philosophies can coexist, but I do expect one to drastically overtake the other as the tooling gets better on that side. I cannot tell you which.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think for me, when I think about it, I don't see a point in which AI will be writing our code, but I do think that we are at a point where AI can greatly improve user experience, and GPT-3 is exciting to me, not because I think that it's going to go write React components for me, but like it'll allow us to do really cool things with UI and improve features that could benefit from that, like autocomplete, and stuff like that, or just like all kinds of different areas where AI and generated text or ideas might be interesting and useful. But yeah, I'm more at like the feature level. I didn't think about the testing. I really love that. But yeah, I don't think AI no code is coming anytime soon. I think no code is still very early. And it's hard enough already to have people generate code that will generate code. But yeah, I'm not sure I trust AIs to do that just yet.
I will call out that.
Sorry, go ahead, Theo.
No, you've talked a minute, Tony. You first.
I had a thought. Like I don't. So I was on vacation last week. I don't know anything about GPT-3 except like a couple of headlines I read. So I'm coming into this completely changed world apparently. But one common thing we do is we go from like a Figma mockup to GraphQL schema. I'm wondering if you could train the thing to like look at components in specific things and propose like a GraphQL schema or something like that.
Interesting.
To kind of aid that process. Or that might be a little bit too abstract though. Like I don't know how good this thing is. I have some ideas though.
Yeah, I guess like what I'm most interested about is like pulling high value out of computationally intensive tasks where like a human, obviously computers are really good at doing math really fast, much better than I can, that's for sure. And so like, we understand our users use our site for the most part. Maybe we don't all the way, and maybe we can use these engines to kind of like suss out like performance optimizations, testing strategies, etc., kind of based on like a series of inputs and high probability like scenarios we can like derive out of that. Is really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think all of these I think my biggest takeaway is that what GPT-3 is doing is getting people talking about it a lot more and thinking about these possibilities. I feel like people have been saying like AI is going to write code and stuff for a while, but I feel like we're at a point now where people are really starting to think like, wow, where can this be applied? And we're at a point where it might even make sense to apply it. So yeah, I'm just excited to see where it comes, and I'm sure we'll see sprinkles of it across many different fields and across many areas that we didn't even talk about today. Like there's all kind of interesting things that could be done with it. Like maybe you let AI figure out, like you give it some rough ideas for colors and it'll generate like an accessible color scheme that matches as best as it can to what you want, things like that. Pretty like, like who knows what it'll be doing. But yeah, I think it's cool to think about.
I like all the ideas in chat about using it to generate GraphQL queries, but you guys aren't going far enough. You clearly haven't written enough SQL if you think that we need help writing GraphQL queries. I would much rather an AI that can handle SQL for me. Yeah. The sooner I never have to write SQL. If I didn't have to write any more SQL tomorrow, it's still too late.
YAML, JSON, like honestly, queries are the easiest to write. Like I would take AI that could write any of these other config formats or DSLs, whatever you want to call them. Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. Awesome. So let's see. We are past the hour, which is awesome. This is great. So we still got a little while. I mean, we're scheduled till for another basically 25 minutes. So I'm not in any rush. But what I haven't done is really let y'all talk about. Is there anything that you're doing at Twitch that we haven't talked about that you wanted to talk about today? Like I want to make sure we get a chance to talk about all of the things that you wanted to cover. So while you're marinating on that, I'll just keep taking a look and see if there's anything else going on here in this chat. Ooh, okay.
Sounds like Fluffy Plums was satisfied with our conjectures.
Awesome. Cool. Actually, Mark asks, or Zurich, I'll use his handle here. So, is twerp still a thing internally? I don't even know what that is. If so, is there any special relationship to GraphQL? Any automation? Are all use cases pretty much twerp calls from that GraphQL gateway? How do you know all this? Are you a spy?
He's indeed a spy. So I can actually post the link in chat. Twerp is our RPC framework, similar to gRPC.
Yeah.
It uses a protobuf. Oh yeah, Mark posted the link on GitHub.
Nice, thank you.
So yeah, that's how all our services, for the most part, talk to each other. We still have some old ones that use like HTTP, JSON without this, but for the past since this release, since a little bit before the release of this library, that's how our services talk to each other, and that's how GraphQL communicates to each service. It doesn't have a special relationship with GraphQL. It's kind of just a way we talk to services, but I think there is opportunity to maybe improve the mapping from like a data type in a GraphQL schema to a data type in the twerp protobuf. We don't always design our services that way. Like sometimes a service just has some data and GraphQL uses it in a different way than maybe some other service uses it. So I think we try to keep it a little more general. There's definitely a lot of services that are only exposed via GraphQL, but we don't have anything super specific there. The only thing I can think of is someone asked a question about how we handle like authorization in our GraphQL API.
Yeah.
And my answer was that the GraphQL API gets this authentication context, like who is this user, and are they say who they say they are. And then we pass that authentication context to the services via twerp, via like some request headers. And then the services can use that information to say, hey, I know user Tony is making a request to see who's the channel moderator for this channel. Can they do this? Are they allowed to do this? So the service that owns that data, that relationship data, like the channel moderator, channel editor service, can take that authentication context and say, no, there's not a relationship here, kick it out.
Yeah.
Or yes, here's the information. So in that way, like we use this authentication context passing to allow the services to make their own authorization decisions as close to the data they protect as possible. Other than that, there's just a lot of opportunity to make some automation there. Yeah. I was actually thinking maybe I don't know how good this GPT thing is, but maybe we could use it to figure out the mapping between these twerp services and like the GraphQL schema automatically. And we could boost our code generation. But again, I don't know anything about GPT-3.
Look at what Fluffy Plums has done with that question. This is now a GPT-3 panel, and all future questions will revolve around it. That's so funny. Yeah, this is cool. I just brought up the link on twerp. This looks awesome. There's actually going to be, I believe someone's doing a talk at Summit there's a topic room about this, like GraphQL and microservices. What does it mean? Like about, what does it look like using GraphQL over gRPC and stuff like that? So that might be interesting. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, awesome. So we've had a second to kind of think. Was there any other topics that you all wanted to cover before we wrap this up? And also, while you're thinking about it, if you're in the chat and you have a question, go ahead and ask them now, folks, before it's too late.
If you guys don't have anything, I'm really curious what the plans on the Apollo side are for the new future of suspense and partial hydration. Like those are really exciting topics for me, and I'm really excited to see what's going on the relay side there. I know that a lot of it's just because those two teams are tied together internally now, but I'm curious what Apollo's plans are for adopting those patterns in the near future.
Well, I don't have a whole lot to say here. We will support suspense when it becomes stable, maybe before then. As someone who just spent 11 months reworking, the internals of a library with a long beta period where people could try it, but without stamping it as final, I absolutely sympathize with needing to just work through, all the edge cases around a radically new system like suspense. And I mean, as a very basic sketch, I'm imagining that you might be able to pass like a suspend true option to the use query hook, and that would sort of let Apollo know that it could throw a promise instead of just returning a useless initial loading result and then later, updating with the real data. So that story, like at that high level, has made sense for a long time, and maybe we should just go ahead and take the risk of implementing it in terms of what exists now, and just plan on updating it if they make any breaking changes. But with regard to partial hydration, I'm guessing that's more along the lines of like server-side rendering might not like have to render everything, but then the client could pick up where it left off.
It's a combination of that and combining queries from the way I read about it I should find the article and link that too, but the post that Facebook made about it seemed to be a combination of what you're describing, which is partial server-side rendering combined with query coalescence at a compilation level. So any given route would have all of its potential data collected ahead of time in a single query, and as parts of that are resolved, the JavaScript would be asynchronously loaded as well, and ideally those things would hit as close to the same time as possible.
Yeah. So I mean that has echoes of like code splitting, but not just for your JavaScript code, for your data as well. Yes. And I've also seen presentations from the Facebook team on that, and it's exciting. And I, if I didn't have this wonderful job and was still at Facebook, I can think of, I'll put it this way, nothing more exciting if I was working at Facebook than like being on the team who was working on their like all-encompassing internal framework for data and JavaScript and CSS delivery with like tiered priorities of resources and so on and so forth, because you could just like really over-engineer it and get everything right, and then like get like really high bandwidth feedback from thousands of UI engineers using it every day, and that could be like a really great job for a developer tools enthusiast. On the open source side, needing to ship a library that is, more or less just a library that sort of lets you opt into, different levels of commitment, like whether you want to do build time stuff or not. Maybe you're fine with parsing your queries at runtime and not doing any pre-compilation. Setting things up so that experience feels like you're able to just like bite off the next chunk as you came to it, as you were ready to sort of like invest in that like new form of fanciness, is a different problem, right? Because it's not like a monolithic framework that we can sort of ask everyone to use, and even though there are many different use cases at Facebook, they are still all sort of like, Facebook-ish use cases, right? So that doesn't approach the diversity of use cases that Apollo client users have, taken as a whole. So the luxury of being able to build like an all-encompassing system like that is very tempting in my mind, and I understand why they would go for that at Facebook, and it's pretty cool that they are also like letting other people see how they did it. But they have a different set of users and needs. That makes sense. I don't think that Apollo will ever become like a JavaScript and CSS delivery mechanism. I really hope that JavaScript as a language, as implemented on in browsers and in Node, will end up with a set of primitives around like its module system that support use cases like that, like dynamic code loading, code splitting, etc. That's driven by like user interaction, not just by whatever you decided to import at the very beginning of loading the page.
Well, I guess to go a slight level higher up, I totally get that. Like, it wouldn't be a good role for Apollo and the customers that it serves to go Facebook's model of tying React and Relay really closely together. But there are a lot of single pieces that both have been exposed in React for library or authors to consume, and also opportunities to use something like the Apollo code gen patterns to generate route-based queries so that you can start fetching data before you're actually rendering your React. And I was just curious, primarily, if there was any stuff going in that direction. Do you see a future where you might actually fetch data for a given route through Apollo before your React is even rendered?
Yes. We would never rely on that as a principle that we assumed everyone was doing, but just in a very concrete, practical way, batching and prefetching data so that it's just already there by the time you're doing your rendering is going to speed up the rendering process. So making that something that you could opt into. I like the patterns that I've seen. I don't know how up to date these are for preloading queries, even on hover. So that by the time these are actually clicks on the button, it's already.
Yeah, use lazy query is one of my favorite recent additions, and it's made things DIY, early hydration so much easier. I have a lot of on hover fetch lazy query queries all over Twitch now.
That's cool. Yeah, that's something Gatsby builds in, which is pretty nice. Yeah.
I have a question for you, Ben. Have you ever explored using or dropping Apollo client in a web worker, and pushing all the cache, all the CPU cycles that Apollo client is doing off of the UI thread, and then just giving data back to React in a memoized and safe way?
Yes, absolutely. And for everyone else watching, I did not distribute a roadmap here for other people to just pick things off of it and ask them as leading questions. But thank you so much for asking that question, because that would be, oh man, I feel like web workerizing relatively large JavaScript libraries is kind of the way to get them out of people's bundles and make it so that fetching and executing them is no longer. You read all these articles from the Google developer advocates, Adi Osmani, and others who talk about how bad it is to be doing all this JavaScript execution on the main thread, and then you're waiting for the part of the article where they're and here's how you can do it off the main thread, and it never comes, right? And part of the reason for that is that traditionally the web worker API has been sort of clunky, hard to work with. You needed a separate entry point script to start the web worker, and communication with the worker is asynchronous. For Apollo's case specifically, I think I can distill the problem down to just this. We are a pathological case for post message. And that means a couple of things. First of all, I've seen customers whose GraphQL query responses are more than 100 kilobytes. And pushing that much data over post message, which is going to have to clone it with the structured clone algorithm, is not only relatively slow, that's going to take, on the order of 100 milliseconds to just push the data back to the main thread so that it can be rendered by React. But because post message is cloning the data every time, you lose this nice property that Apollo client has right now, where to some extent, if your data hasn't changed, it will be able to give you back exactly the same objects, triple equals, the same, which is a fact that you can take advantage of in React with pure components. And so I don't see this as a complete showstopper, but it does mean we can't just use post message in the most straightforward way. We need some kind of way of keeping track of objects that have been sent over the wire before, and then just sending sort of an identifier for those objects the next time, so that at least you don't have to repeatedly clone send data back and forth. But yeah, if we solve that problem, or if anybody just submits a PR to get that work started, then it would be a paradise from the perspective of our Apollo client team, because you're right. You'd be able to load the library in parallel. You'd even be able to kick off queries before they would have been kicked off, in the normal stream of things, and really take advantage of like IndexedDB and all sorts of other things. Like the web worker could actually be doing fetches directly because the fetch API is available to workers. You don't have to like proxy that all through the main thread. So yeah, huge opportunity there to take a large chunk out of page load times, especially. So very, very much interested in solving those problems and making that happen.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so we've got no further questions from the chat that it seems, unless I missed something. No, I think I got them all.
Just a lot of Svelte and GraphQL crap shooting, the usual.
A little big data chat. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, I mean, we're also coming up on 4:30. This has flown by. So I guess what I'll do now is we got a couple minutes left. I'll leave the floor open if anybody has like any last minute things or maybe any more questions for Ben. Maybe you can field one or two more. 420. There you go in the chat. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. Any other last burning desires, questions, tips, anything at Twitch that you want to showcase, talk about, or that's coming up? Actually, hold up. There was a question that I missed real quick, and then we can jump to that. And the question was, Theo, I believe this one might be for you. How do y'all package the components that you share across apps? Like, is it a monolithic kind of thing, or like what's the process look like for sharing components?
Apps, plural, if only. But yeah, we for the most part have a single monolithic project that serves the majority of our web experiences. For the components that are shared, the majority of those are design owned under our shared like design component library. Beyond that, there are a couple other like shared package libraries across Twitch. Like it's a team level thing, but for the most part, if you're in one of the few projects that isn't the core like web project and you want a component that's from that core web project, you're doing that by copy and paste.
Got it. Awesome. So then we had actually Trevor Blades in the chat with a question. Not sure if it was talked about. Does Twitch do any type of manual cache pruning or like garbage collection?
Hopefully soon. I'm sure that Twitch Ben has some thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely soon. I mean, we're trying to move to Apollo Client 3.0 and suss out the performance wins we get from there and begin moving to that world. Obviously, like accumulating memory over several hours of Twitch streams is not good, so we don't want to do that.
Very cool. Awesome. Last question. Do you use Next.js or just like custom React? But I would imagine probably not Next.js for Twitch.
Yeah, pretty vanilla React for the core Twitch site. There's too much there to do on server side, especially when you have to deal with auth and all the like server level like user experience or like client level user experience experiments, etc. But for the mobile site, which doesn't have logged in experience at all, we do use Next.js for that. And there's a lot of really interesting tech there. I've been pushing the guys working on that to do their own like public talk soon, because it's one of the most interesting tech stacks at our company, and it very much relies on Next and a ton of interesting things that built on top to build a super performant global web experience for mobile.
But they're using Relay, so
Awesome. Let's see. I think that might be. Yeah, I think that wraps it up. So there we go. So now we're back. We're squared back up. Is there anything else that you would like to mention about Twitch? What's coming up? Development as a whole, or anything you're working on? I mean, we've already talked about so many cool things. I can't really think of anything else.
whenever I have an audience of developers, I have to complain about how slow the TypeScript compiler is. And hopefully, if any of you guys in here are interested in a programming language that's faster than JavaScript and want to take on the really fun challenge of building the TypeScript AST in anything else so it can be performant, please do. We're suffering.
Yeah.
Lots of TypeScript on big projects can get really rough with the TypeScript compiler in its current state.
It's worth at least like giving some flavor to that, where like we have hundreds of contributors, probably in the order of like between 200 and 300 total over time, and like maybe 1.75-ish million lines of TypeScript React code, kind of in a big mono repo that serves all of our desktop web experiences. So
Wow.
the TypeScript compiler engine it's doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
The blog post that went along with the 1.0 release of Dino,
Yep.
the Rusty node replacement. I don't know, replacement is the wrong word, but there's a line in that where Ryan Dahl says TSC must be rewritten in Rust.
Yep.
And
I
think that's true.
Mhm.
It's gonna
I'm
happen.
very fond of it. SWR is pretty far along, but again, it's just a recompiler, not so much a type checker, and it doesn't give a crap about how valid your TypeScript is. It just strips out the typings and hopes that the subset of JS that's left works. It's super performant. And if you look at like the numbers on ESBuild or SWR, it's like orders of magnitude, like 100 times or more faster than anything that can be done with the current TypeScript compiler. That said, the biggest issue is the AST for TypeScript is just a crazy model that doesn't translate well into other programming languages due to all the weird like type inference and assumptions that can occur at like AST level. It's an interesting problem. A couple of the guys on the Deno team, trying to remember, Kitson, I think's his name. He wrote a really good article about this as well. Deno's definitely the reason I've regained faith that this can happen, but I just love to rant about it when there's a developer audience because the sooner that isn't slowed, the better.
Orta, who's like the main maintainer of TypeScript and stuff, he was also talking about that's something that he's trying to get like a push for, which is compiler written in something other than JavaScript, because it's at peak. Like it can't get any faster where it is now. Maybe some micro performance updates, but nothing really is going to shift that weight until it's written in another language. So if you're out there,
I feel like
go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at one point, didn't they rewrite the compiler from C# or .NET into JavaScript because they thought, the community effects would be so valuable? So that they'd probably think it's ironic now that the winds are shifting again, but that's just what the winds do.
That's what they do.
Want things to be fast.
Yeah.
When something's not popular enough, you make it slower so more people will use it. Then when it gets too popular, you have to make it faster so people won't stop.
Yeah, that's how the world works.
That's amazing. Yes, Tony, you're going to start streaming GPT-3 discussions. Or better yet, let GPT-3 stream those discussions. What?
I'll just stream I'll just stream myself going back and forth with like Rich Harris on Twitter about spell performance.
Yes. Amazing. Yeah, Twitch plays GPT-3. Or what if, or I might train it to play a game for me. Since I'm really bad at first-person shooters, that would be the first one I would train it to play.
Twitch trains an AI to play COD.
Would watch.
I would really like Twitch trains an AI. That would be a fantastic channel.
It really would. That'd be amazing.
Twitch builds an AI.
Ooh.
Could you feed all the streams into the training data and then have it make a stream as output?
Oh yeah, like you see like where people train models to, they like have it read episodes of The Office and then have it generate an episode of The Office. Yeah.
Yeah.
Build the perfect
That'd
stream.
be amazing.
There you go.
I was thinking more, whenever I hear people talking about machine learning and AI, I've always liked to replace it in the conversation with Twitch chat. And when you're talking about AI building software, think of it Twitch chat building software, or AI going through your queries or code looking for things, Twitch chat instead, and thinking of how could we build a really awful stream where Twitch does this thing for us instead.
That is amazing. It's like, people type in characters on stream and then that just writes out to the code. That'd be amazing.
I've also been considering for my coding streams doing a plugin where you can at any point redeem channel points to delete the file I'm currently working on and force me to start
Oh,
from
that
scratch.
is hilarious. That's really evil, but hilarious. I would give you all the bits. Yeah, that's amazing. Awesome, cool. Well, I think with that, we're gonna wrap up here. Last in follower, thanks for jumping in. Yeah, I think we'll wrap up here. This has been an amazing discussion. I just want to thank you all again, Theo, Tony, Ben, for joining us from the Twitch side. I really learned a ton. I love hearing about all the cool things you're doing at Twitch. As mentioned a million times before, huge fan of the platform and the work that you all are doing to make it possible. Ben, thank you so much for coming on and joining us and giving that Apollo perspective, and yeah, being here to kind of field questions and guide us along. It is much appreciated. And thank you everyone for tuning in and joining us in the chat. This was a great experience. We got a lot of great questions. It was so awesome to have you all here. I really appreciate it. And I think, with that, I'll let y'all say goodbye, and then we'll head on out.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. This is a lot of fun. It's great chatting.
Bye,
Cheers.
everybody.
Thank you all again. Talk to you soon.